In 1947, the biggest Hollywood stars of the day formed a political crackdown on movie making during the McCarthy era. Nearly 80 years later, Jane Fonda says those forces are back.
2 Academy Awards, 7 nominations, a career spanning 6 decades. Jane Fonda had everything Hollywood could offer: the talent, the beauty, the pedigree, the box office appeal. And then, somewhere along the way, the industry seemed to turn its back. The roles got smaller, the phone calls less frequent. The opportunities that should have been hers went to others. Some fans believe the reasons go deeper than what we've been told, deeper than age, deeper than changing tastes. Today, we're taking a look at what may have happened behind the scenes, at the complicated relationship between one of America's most talented actresses and an industry that couldn't quite figure out what to do with her. The rise of a star. The 1960s belonged to a new generation of actors. Method acting was in. The old studio system was crumbling, and Jane Fonda arrived at exactly the right moment. She wasn't just another actress trying to break in. She carried a famous name, sure, but she also brought something Hollywood desperately needed: authenticity. While other young actresses were content playing variations of the same role, Fonda seemed hungry for something more. Being Henry Fonda's daughter came with expectations, the pressure to measure up, the comparisons that never stopped. But Jane seemed determined to carve her own path, to prove she wasn't just trading on a famous name. Cat Ballou showed she could handle comedy with a lightness that surprised critics. The 1965 Western spoof wasn't supposed to be a star-making vehicle, but Fonda held her own alongside Lee Marvin's Oscar-winning performance. When Barefoot in the Park paired her with Robert Redford in 1967, audiences saw chemistry that couldn't be manufactured. They lit up the screen together, young and beautiful and full of energy. It was the kind of romantic comedy that made you believe in love. She could have stayed in that lane, the charming ingenue, the pretty face in lighthearted films. It would have been an easy, comfortable career. But these early roles, charming as they were, barely hinted at what was coming. They shoot horses, don't they? Changed the conversation entirely. Playing Gloria in that brutal Depression-era drama, Fonda stripped away every trace of Hollywood glamour. The performance was uncomfortable to watch. That was the point. Her first Oscar nomination came from a role that required her to look desperate, exhausted, broken. The film depicted a dance marathon where contestants competed for prize money, pushing their bodies to the breaking point. Fonda's Gloria was angry, bitter, defeated by life. Not many actresses at the peak of their beauty would have taken that risk. Clute in 1971 brought her first Oscar. As Bree Daniels, a call girl drawn into a mystery she couldn't control, Fonda created a character who felt real in ways that Hollywood rarely attempted. The scenes where she's alone, trying to maintain her composure, revealed an actress working at a level few of her contemporaries could match. She made Bree complicated, tough but vulnerable, confident but frightened, always trying to maintain control, even as everything spiraled around her. This wasn't luck. This was someone who understood her craft and pushed herself relentlessly. By her early 30s, Jane Fonda had proven she could do anything: comedy, drama, difficult character work. Directors lined up to work with her. Studios knew her name could open a movie. Critics took her seriously in ways they didn't take most young actresses. The trajectory seemed limitless. America's most talented young actress, getting better with every role, showing no signs of playing it safe. What could possibly derail that kind of momentum?
I do want to talk about something that you start with, what you wrote in this letter, because it's really striking. You wrote,
"When everything changed." The late 1960s and early 1970s were turbulent years. The Vietnam War divided the country in ways that still echo today. Protests filled the streets. Young people questioned everything their parents' generation had built, and celebrities increasingly felt compelled to take sides. Jane Fonda didn't just take a side. She became one of the most visible faces of the anti-war movement. While other celebrities issued careful statements or wrote checks to causes, Fonda showed up. She spoke at rallies, she organized, she used her fame as a platform in ways that made studio executives nervous. Her activism escalated through the late 60s and early 70s. She participated in protests at military military bases. She raised money for the Black Panthers. She spoke out against government policies with a directness that few Hollywood stars dared. Some admired her courage. Others questioned her judgment. Then came 1972, the trip to North Vietnam, the photographs that would follow her for the rest of her life. The images of Fonda sitting on an anti-aircraft gun, surrounded by North Vietnamese soldiers, spread across every newspaper in America. To some, it was an act of conscience, visiting a country being bombed by her own nation, seeing the human cost of war firsthand. To others, it was betrayal of the highest order. American soldiers were still in combat. POWs were still being held, and here was one of America's most famous actresses appearing to side with the enemy. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Veterans groups organized protests outside theaters showing her films. Boycotts were planned and publicized. Letters poured into newspapers. Radio stations took calls from angry listeners. The term Hanoi Jane was born, and it stuck with a persistence that surprised even Fonda's harshest critics. Radio broadcasts from Hanoi that featured Fonda's voice became evidence for her critics. She spoke to American servicemen, encouraging them to reconsider their participation in the war. To anti-war activists, these were messages of peace. To veterans and their families, they felt like propaganda that aided the enemy. Many observers believe this moment fractured something in her relationship with Hollywood that never fully healed. It wasn't just about politics. It was about box office calculations, about risk assessment, about the uncomfortable reality that half your potential audience might refuse to buy a ticket. Studio executives had to consider whether casting Jane Fonda was worth the inevitable protests. Over the years, Fonda apologized repeatedly for the photographs, particularly the image on the gun. She called it a huge mistake and expressed deep regret for the pain it caused. She maintained her opposition to the war itself, but acknowledged that her actions, particularly that photograph, had hurt people in ways she never intended. For some, the apologies were genuine and sufficient. For many others, no apology would ever be enough. The damage was done. The paradox of success. Here's what makes Jane Fonda's story so unusual. Her career didn't collapse after Vietnam. In fact, some would argue it reached new heights. Coming Home arrived in 1978, and Fonda won her second Oscar. The film dealt directly with Vietnam, not the politics of the war, but its human aftermath. Playing Sally Hyde, a military wife who falls in love with a paralyzed veteran while her husband serves overseas, Fonda delivered work that felt deeply personal. The film tackled difficult questions about loyalty, love, and the cost of war without being preachy. Some observers noted the irony. Hollywood was willing to reward her for a film about Vietnam, even as the controversy around her activism continued to simmer in the background. The movie resonated with audiences who were finally ready to process what Vietnam had done to the country. It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about people trying to survive the aftermath. Fonda's performance captured that perfectly. The China Syndrome followed in 1979. The timing was almost supernatural. The film about a nuclear power plant accident opened just days before the 3 Mile Island incident. Suddenly, everyone wanted to see it. Life had imitated art in the most unsettling way. The box office was strong. Another Oscar nomination followed. Fonda proved she could carry a thriller, that she didn't need to rely on her dramatic chops alone. 9 to 5 in 1980 became one of the year's biggest hits. Working women across America identified with the frustrations and fantasies the film explored. Watching Fonda, Dolly Parton, and Lily Tomlin scheme against their terrible boss tapped into something cultural that was just beginning to surface. The women's movement was gaining momentum. Workplace equality was being discussed. The movie made over $100 million, enormous for the time, and the theme song became an anthem. On Golden Pond in 1981 gave Fonda something even more valuable than another hit. Working opposite her father Henry in his final role, playing out a story of reconciliation between daughter and father, the film felt like it transcended acting. The real-life tension between Jane and Henry Fonda was well known. Their relationship had been complicated, sometimes painful. Audiences watching them together saw something genuine, something Hollywood couldn't fabricate. It was art reflecting life in the most poignant way possible. Through the early 1980s, Jane Fonda remained bankable. Producers wanted to work with her. Films with her name did business. She was nominated for awards. She was respected. So why does it feel like something was already ending? Some fans believe the answer lies in what was happening beneath the surface. Yes, the films were successful. Yes, the awards kept coming. But many observers noticed the protests never fully stopped. The angry letters continued. The veterans groups never stood down. Every Fonda project came with a footnote, a controversy, a reminder of what had happened in Hanoi. Perhaps studio executives were already doing the math. Perhaps they were already wondering if the complications were worth it. Perhaps they were already looking ahead to a time when it might be easier to cast someone else, someone without the baggage, someone who wouldn't bring protesters to premieres.
One was Richard Nixon. I know you've heard this, but I want our viewers to hear something that Nixon said.
The fitness empire. In 1982, Jane Fonda did something that seemed unrelated to her acting career, but may have changed everything. Jane Fonda's workout wasn't just a successful video, it became a cultural phenomenon, the highest-selling VHS of all time, millions of copies in living rooms across America, follow-up videos that sold just as well, books that topped bestseller lists, a whole industry that made Fonda wealthy beyond what any film salary could provide. Women bought the videos not just to exercise, but to feel empowered. The workouts were tough but achievable. Fonda's voice was encouraging, never condescending. She seemed to understand what women wanted, not just to look better, but to feel stronger, to take control of their bodies in a way that felt revolutionary for the time. The 1980s were a particular moment for women's fitness. Aerobics classes were popping up everywhere. Leg warmers and leotards became fashion statements. The idea that women could be strong, not just thin, was gaining traction. And Jane Fonda was at the center of it all. The financial independence this created was real. Fonda didn't need Hollywood anymore, at least not for money. She had built something entirely her own, separate from the studios and their calculations. She could make her own choices without worrying about the next paycheck. But some industry observers believe this success came with an unexpected cost. She became so identified with fitness that it may have overshadowed her identity as a serious actress. When casting directors thought of Jane Fonda, did they see an Oscar winner? Or did they see the woman in leg warmers leading aerobics classes? The videos played on constant rotation. They were everywhere. Department stores sold them. Bookstores displayed them prominently. Women traded them with their friends. For a generation of Americans, Jane Fonda wasn't the star of Clute. She was the workout lady on their TV screen. That kind of ubiquity changes how people perceive you. It's hard to see someone as a serious dramatic actress when you've just watched them count jumping jacks in your living room. And perhaps it made it easier for Hollywood to let her drift away. If she had this whole other empire, this other identity, this other source of income and fame, maybe the industry didn't need to fight to keep her. Maybe it became convenient to let her become the fitness expert instead of fighting to cast her in dramatic roles that came with protests and controversy. She had another career, she'd be fine.
Learn about what is autocracy, how does it rise, and how do we defeat it. We're going to learn about
The quiet disappearance. The mid-1980s brought fewer roles. The Morning After earned an Oscar nomination in 1986, but the film itself barely registered with audiences. The parts that came afterward were smaller, less interesting, not worthy of someone with 2 Oscars on her mantle. By the late 1980s, many fans noticed something happening, or rather, not happening. Jane Fonda wasn't working much anymore. The scripts that did arrive weren't good. The offers weren't what they should have been for an actress of her caliber and track record. Some observers pointed to ageism. Hollywood has never been kind to actresses over 40, let alone approaching 50. The roles for women dried up once they could no longer play the romantic lead opposite men 20 years older. It was an industry pattern, brutal and familiar. But Jane Fonda was Jane Fonda. Talent like that doesn't just disappear. Yet somehow, Hollywood seemed to be moving on without her. The Vietnam controversy never faded. If anything, it seemed to harden with time. New generations discovered the photographs and formed their opinions. Conservative talk radio kept the anger alive. Veterans groups remained active in protesting her appearances. Every few years, the story would resurface in the media. The wound never healed, never even began to scar over. Perhaps studio executives simply tired of dealing with it. Every casting announcement brought protests. Every interview brought questions about Hanoi. Every premiere might include demonstrators outside the theater. Marketing departments had to factor in the controversy. Was it any wonder that producers might look at a list of talented actresses and choose someone who didn't come with that baggage? The roles she did get often felt like afterthoughts, supporting parts that didn't use her abilities, projects that came and went without much notice. It must have been frustrating for someone who had been at the top of her profession just a few years earlier. Then came 1991. Jane Fonda married Ted Turner and announced she was essentially retiring from acting. She was only 54. Many people accepted this at face value, a woman choosing marriage and other interests over her career. She threw herself into Turner's world with the same intensity she'd brought to acting. She became involved in his business ventures. She attended endless meetings and events. She focused on philanthropy, particularly work around adolescent reproductive health and preventing teen pregnancy. But some observers couldn't help wondering if there was more to the story. Was she really choosing to walk away at 54? Or was she acknowledging a reality that Hollywood was too polite to say out loud? That they'd already moved on? That the phone had stopped ringing? That the scripts that did arrive weren't worth doing? The timing seemed significant. Her last films hadn't been successful. The roles had been getting smaller and less interesting for years. The industry was changing, focusing more on special effects spectacles and franchise films than the adult dramas Fonda excelled in. And there was always that persistent question hanging in the air. Did Hollywood want to keep dealing with the Jane Fonda controversy, or was it easier to let her ride off into the sunset with her billionaire husband? For 15 years, Jane Fonda was simply absent from film. 15 years when an actress of her talent should have been doing remarkable work. Her 50s and early 60s, ages when many actresses find their most interesting roles, when life experience deepens performances, when there's so much to say. Instead, silence, an empty space where a career should have been thriving.
Of this country to do the same. You know, we don't want to be a pillar of support to this regime that's forming.
The complicated return. When Fonda came back to acting in 2005 with Monster-in-Law, many fans were curious. 15 years was a long time. Could she still do it? Did audiences still care? Had she been forgotten? The answer, financially at least, was yes. The movie made over $150 million worldwide. People showed up. They were interested. They wanted to see Jane Fonda on screen again. The curiosity factor alone was worth something, and she was good in it. Funny, sharp, clearly enjoying herself. But something had shifted. The role was purely commercial, a broad comedy opposite Jennifer Lopez about a nightmarish mother-in-law. Not the kind of complex dramatic work Fonda had built her reputation on. Not the kind of role that would remind people she'd won 2 Oscars. It was entertaining, but it wasn't Clute. It wasn't Coming Home. And the roles that followed were even smaller, supporting parts that barely registered. Guest spots on television shows, nothing that really used her abilities or gave her material to sink her teeth into. She was working, but it felt like going through the motions. Other actresses from her generation were thriving. Meryl Streep was winning Oscars well into her 60s, playing complex women in prestigious films. Judi Dench played everything from M in the Bond films to Queen Victoria, proving that age didn't diminish star power or acting ability. Helen Mirren was in demand for major dramatic roles, winning awards, commanding the screen. Why not Jane Fonda? Some fans believe the answer is obvious. Those actresses didn't carry the baggage Fonda carried. They could be cast without worry of protests or boycotts. They didn't require studio executives to brace for controversy or negative publicity. They were safe. Jane Fonda would never be safe. Television proved more welcoming than film. The newsroom gave her a recurring role as Leona Lansing, a media mogul who owned the network at the center of the show. The part used her commanding presence, her ability to dominate a scene. Working with Aaron Sorkin's dialogue, she reminded people she could handle anything thrown at her. And then came Grace and Frankie, the Netflix series that would run 7 seasons and prove Fonda could still anchor a show. Co-created by Marta Kaufman and Howard J. Morris, the series premiered in 2015 and became one of Netflix's longest-running original series. Grace and Frankie was meaningful for many reasons. It showed older women navigating life, sexuality, friendship, business ventures. It gave Fonda and Lily Tomlin material that respected their intelligence and talent. They played women whose husbands leave them for each other, forcing them to figure out this new phase of life they hadn't planned for. It found an audience that was hungry for stories about women over 70, women who didn't just disappear after middle age. The show worked because it was honest. It dealt with aging without making it the punchline. It explored sex and relationships and starting over in ways that felt real. And Fonda and Tomlin had chemistry that made everything click. But it was still television, not film, and some observers noted the difference. The prestige, the cultural impact, the permanence of film roles, those seemed to elude her in this second act of her career. Television felt like a consolation prize, not a triumph. The activism never stopped. Throughout her later years, Jane Fonda continued to be Jane Fonda. She never stopped speaking out. She never stopped organizing. She never stopped using her platform for causes she believed in, regardless of how it might affect her career prospects. The Fire Drill Fridays climate protests saw Fonda, in her 80s, getting arrested on the steps of the Capitol week after week. Images of her being led away in handcuffs went viral on social media. Some people admired her commitment to environmental causes, her willingness to put her body on the line. Others saw it as attention-seeking from someone who couldn't let go of her activist past. The division remained as sharp as ever. She was relentless about it. Every Friday, showing up, speaking about climate change, getting arrested, it became a pattern people could set their watches by. Celebrities would join her, young activists would stand beside her, and the cameras would capture it all. She spoke openly about her past, about her struggles, about her regrets. She wrote memoirs that laid bare her battles with eating disorders, her complicated relationship with her father, her 3 marriages, her mistakes, and growth. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was off limits. The book sold well, generating headlines and controversy in equal measure. But every time she made headlines for activism, it reinforced a certain image. Not Jane Fonda the actress, but Jane Fonda the activist, Jane Fonda the protester, Jane Fonda the controversial figure who wouldn't sit down and be quiet, who wouldn't just enjoy her golden years peacefully. Some industry observers have suggested this continued activism, admirable as it might be, made it even harder for Hollywood to embrace her fully in her later years. Every arrest was another news story. Every protest was another reminder of the controversy. Every interview turned into a discussion about politics rather than her work. Studios want safe bets, bankable stars who won't generate negative publicity. Jane Fonda was anything but safe. There's an interesting question buried in this pattern. If she'd been less outspoken, less active, less willing to court controversy in her 70s and 80s, would Hollywood have been more willing to use her? Would better roles have come? Would she have been offered the kind of prestige projects that went to other actresses her age? Or was the die already cast decades earlier, the decision made long ago that Jane Fonda was too much trouble? What Hollywood lost. Looking back at Jane Fonda's career, many film enthusiasts feel a sense of loss, not for what we got, 2 Oscars, numerous brilliant performances, decades of work that ranges from good to exceptional, but for what we didn't get. What roles might she have played in her 50s and 60s if Hollywood had fully embraced her? What performances are we missing? What films were never made because casting directors decided the controversy wasn't worth it? What characters never came to life because producers took the safer path? The comparison to her contemporaries is stark and uncomfortable. Meryl Streep won Oscars at 60 for Julie and Julia and 62 for The Iron Lady. Helen Mirren won at 61 for The Queen. These women proved that age didn't diminish talent, that audiences would embrace complex stories about older women, that there was both artistic and commercial value in featuring actresses over 60 in substantial roles. But they got opportunities Fonda didn't seem to receive.
I also have a climate pack that elects people all over the country because
Streep played Margaret Thatcher. Mirren played Queen Elizabeth II. These were meaty, complex, awards-worthy roles in prestige pictures. Where were Jane Fonda's equivalents? Was it just ageism? Partly. Hollywood's bias against aging actresses affects everyone. The industry has always struggled to write interesting roles for women over 40, let alone over 60. But many observers believe Fonda faced an additional barrier: the accumulated weight of decades of controversy, the Vietnam photographs that never stopped resurfacing, the protests that never ceased, the segment of the audience that would never forgive, never forget, never let it go. In a business driven by profit, by risk calculation, by the desire to avoid complications, Jane Fonda represented a gamble that Hollywood seemed increasingly unwilling to take. Easier to cast someone else for that important role, safer to avoid the potential headaches, the angry phone calls, the protesters outside theaters, simpler to let her drift toward television, where the stakes felt lower and the controversies somehow mattered less. Think about the performances we might have gotten. Fonda at 60 could have played complex roles about power, regret, resilience. Fonda at 70 could have brought depth to stories about aging, mortality, legacy. Instead, we got guest spots and supporting roles in comedies that didn't challenge her. The meaning of it all. Jane Fonda's career tells a story about more than just one actress. It illuminates how Hollywood works, how America processes controversy, how political actions can echo across decades in ways that no one anticipates at the time. She made choices, big ones, consequential ones. She stood by them, even when they cost her dearly. She apologized for the things she came to see as mistakes while maintaining her core beliefs about the war. She refused to disappear quietly, refused to simply accept whatever Hollywood was willing to offer, refused to stop being herself, even when being herself came with consequences. That kind of defiance has a price. In an industry that values compliance, that rewards playing it safe, that prefers stars who don't make waves or generate controversy, Jane Fonda was always going to be complicated, always going to be a risk, always going to require studio executives to brace themselves for potential backlash. The question is whether Hollywood should have tried harder to separate the artist from the activist, the performances from the politics. Should talent trump everything else? Should an actress who delivered 2 Oscar-winning performances be judged solely on her work, not her personal beliefs or political actions? Some fans believe the industry failed her, that it let controversy override talent in a way that diminished everyone.
Creating online hate groups to stop extremist violence. Seems like that's the antithesis of what you're trying to do.
That it took the easy way out by allowing one of its brightest talents to fade from major film roles when she should have been doing her best, most mature work. That Hollywood chose commercial safety over artistic excellence. They point to the double standard. Male actors with controversial views or problematic personal lives continue to work steadily. They get second chances, third chances, endless opportunities for redemption. But women, especially women who speak out politically, face a different calculation. The punishment seems harsher. The forgiveness comes slower. The path back is more difficult. Others believe Fonda made her choices with eyes wide open and accepted the consequences, that she knew speaking out would cost her professionally, that she valued her principles more than her career and has no reason for regret, that she chose activism over acting and made that choice freely, understanding what it meant. They argue that actions have consequences, that you can't expect to be controversial and not face backlash, that Hollywood is a business, and businesses have to consider their audiences, that studios weren't obligated to cast someone who came with built-in protests and boycotts. The truth, as usual, probably contains elements of both perspectives. Life isn't simple, careers aren't simple, people aren't simple. Jane Fonda isn't simple. What we're left with is a remarkable body of work from a remarkable actress who might have given us even more if circumstances had been different. If forgiveness had come easier in a country still processing Vietnam. If Hollywood had been braver about standing by controversial artists. If the calculation had valued talent and artistic excellence over commercial safety and risk avoidance. But circumstances weren't different. And we have what we have. Brilliant performances in the first act of her career. A puzzling absence during what should have been her prime years, and a muted return that never quite recaptured the glory of her earlier work. Jane Fonda is still with us, still working, still speaking out, still being exactly who she is, unapologetically. Grace and Frankie proved she can still command an audience, still make people laugh and cry and think. Recent film appearances show the talent hasn't dimmed even slightly. She's still Jane Fonda.
Those in our industry who acquiesce to what's happening, they'll hear from us as well.
But many fans can't help feeling we missed something. That the third act of her film career should have been bigger, richer, more significant. That Hollywood gave up too easily on someone who had already proven she was among the best actors of her generation, male or female. The reasons why are complicated, layered, impossible to reduce to a simple explanation. Age and gender played their role. Hollywood has always discarded women once they pass a certain age, as if talent has an expiration date. Politics and protest added another dimension. The Vietnam controversy that never faded, that followed her like a shadow across decades. Business calculations factored in. The risk assessment that studios make. The fear of controversy, the easier path of casting someone else. Public perception mattered too. Once you become known for something other than your art, whether it's fitness videos or political activism, It becomes hard for people to see you clearly. The image overwhelms the person. The controversy drowns out the talent. The weight of history and the difficulty of forgiveness created an additional barrier. Some wounds don't heal, some people never forgive. And in an industry that depends on audience goodwill, that calculates risk against reward, an actress who brought protesters along with her talent became someone to avoid. All of it mixed together into a situation where one of cinema's great actresses gradually moved from the center to the margins. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realized she wasn't getting the roles anymore, wasn't being considered for the important projects, had become someone Hollywood could live without. Whether Hollywood gave up on Jane Fonda, or she gave up on Hollywood, or the truth is some combination of both forces pushing in opposite directions, the result is the same. We have the performances she gave us, and they're remarkable, evidence of genuine brilliance. But we also have the shadow of all the performances that might have been, the roles she should have played, the films that should have been made, the work we'll never see. That's the untold story, not a simple tale of right and wrong, good guys and bad guys, but a complex web of choices and consequences, talent and controversy, brilliance and baggage. The story of how an actress with 2 Oscars and limitless ability somehow became someone Hollywood found it easier to live without. And whether that was fair or inevitable, whether it was Hollywood's failure or simply the price of conviction, whether anyone could have changed it or it was destined to unfold exactly this way, it remains one of cinema's great what-ifs. What Jane Fonda might have given us if everything had been different. What we lost when the industry decided she was too complicated, too controversial, too risky to embrace fully. We still have Clute and Coming Home. We still have those extraordinary performances that remind us why she mattered, why she deserves to be remembered as one of the greats. We just don't have everything she might have given us if Hollywood had fought harder to keep her, if the calculations had been different, if forgiveness had come easier, if talent had been enough. That's what remains untold. Not a scandal, but a slow fade. Not a single moment of rejection, but a gradual pulling away. Not a dramatic ending, but a quiet acceptance that it was easier to move on than to deal with all that Jane Fonda represented. Easier for Hollywood, maybe easier for her too. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. Not that she was pushed out, but that somewhere along the way, everyone just accepted it. The industry moved on. She found other things to do. And one of the most talented actresses of her generation spent the latter part of her career on the margins, doing television and small film roles, when she should have been front and center, showing everyone what she could still do. The story isn't over. Jane Fonda is still here, still working, still fighting for causes she believes in, but the Hollywood chapter feels incomplete, like a book with pages torn out. And those missing pages are what we'll always wonder about.